Okay, so we've been kind of up to our eyeballs in hydrogen hype lately, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's everywhere you look these days.
Yeah, every time you turn around is the answer to some energy crisis or another.
Right, like we're gonna have trucks running on it, buildings heated by it.
Maybe even rockets someday.
Yeah, exactly. But let's dive into this IEA report, Global Hydrogen Review 2024, and see what's really going on.
Yeah, how does the hype stack up to reality?
Well, you mentioned hype, and it's interesting because the report actually points out that global demand for hydrogen hit 97 million tons in 2023.
Wow,
That's a lot of hydrogen.
it is. That sounds like things are really taking off. Does that mean we're on track for that hydrogen-powered future we keep hearing about?
Well, here's the thing. The report also says that most of that demand isn't for the clean green hydrogen that everyone's so excited about.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's mostly for what they call traditional uses of hydrogen.
So same stuff we've been using for decades.
Exactly. Things like oil refining and making ammonia, those industries have been using hydrogen for a long time.
So not exactly the clean energy revolution we might picture when we read the headlines.
Yeah, not quite. And to make it even a bit more complicated, the majority of this hydrogen, it's still being made from fossil fuels.
Really? I thought we were moving away from that.
We are, but it's a slow process.
Yeah.
And most of that is from natural gas. So it's meeting the demand that's already there, but it's not really helping us reduce emissions the way we need to.
Okay, so that's a little disheartening. This report, it talks about these big plans for hydrogen,
Mm.
decarbonizing heavy industries, powering long-haul transport, even storing renewable energy. But if it's not really happening yet, what's the holdup?
Well, cost is a big one.
Makes sense. New technologies are always expensive at first.
Yeah, and this report says that green hydrogen, the kind that's made from renewable energy, it can be 1.5 to 6 times more expensive than a hydrogen made from fossil fuels.
Wow, okay, so it's significantly more expensive to go green. Are there other roadblocks besides the cost?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Think about how big these industries are. Like, they need massive amounts of hydrogen, right? And we just don't have the infrastructure in place to support that kind of a switch.
Right, things like pipelines and...
Exactly.
Okay.
Pipelines, storage facilities, all that stuff. It all needs to be built up.
Okay, so we need to build new infrastructure. But what about the stuff that's already being built, like all those hydrogen fueling stations we keep hearing about? Are those actually taking off?
It's actually a mixed bag. Fuel cell buses, they seem to be doing okay, especially in China.
I've been seeing more about that.
But for passenger cars, the sales are actually going down.
Really? I'm surprised by that. I would have thought with all the buzz around hydrogen cars, more people would be buying them.
Right, you'd think so. The report actually talks about this, and it seems like there are some big challenges with those hydrogen refueling stations. Like, some are being built, but some are actually shutting down.
Oh, wow. Why is that?
It's a couple of things. One is just a lack of demand. If people aren't buying the cars, they don't need the fuel. And the other is that it can be really hard to get a reliable supply of hydrogen to those stations.
Oh, that makes sense. If you can't guarantee the fuel supply, it's hard to sell the cars.
Exactly. So then it makes you wonder, can hydrogen really compete with electric vehicles?
Right, because those are taking off.
They are, and the infrastructure is already there.
It's interesting, though, because it kind of feels like a chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah.
Like we need the demand to justify investing in all that infrastructure, but the high cost and lack of infrastructure are keeping the demand down.
Yeah, it's a tough cycle to break. And that's where policy and some targeted investments, those can be really important to kind of kickstart things.
To get things moving in the right direction.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the production side of things. Everyone seems to be laser focused on green hydrogen, the kind that's made from renewable energy. How's that coming along?
Yeah, electrolyzer technology, that's what they use to split water into hydrogen and oxygen using renewable energy. It's definitely getting better.
That's good to hear.
Companies are scaling up production, but you guessed it, cost is still a big barrier.
It always seems to come back to cost. So are there other, maybe more cost-effective methods of producing hydrogen, at least for now, while that technology matures?
Yeah, the report talks about that, and one option is to use natural gas, but to incorporate carbon capture and storage.
Oh, I've heard of that. So instead of those emissions going into the atmosphere, they're captured and stored somewhere else.
Exactly, they call that blue hydrogen.
Okay, blue hydrogen. So it sounds promising, at least on the surface. Is it really a cleaner option, though?
Well, it definitely has potential, but those projects face their own challenges. Like, they need a lot of policy and financial support to get up and running. And then there are still a lot of questions about the overall emissions from the process, especially what they call upstream emissions.
Upstream. What does that mean?
So that refers to the emissions that are created during the extraction and processing of the natural gas itself.
Oh, so it's not just about the hydrogen production. It's about the whole system.
Exactly.
So even the blue hydrogen isn't quite the clean solution, it sounds like at first.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that there are always trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
And it really highlights how important it is to do a full life cycle analysis for these technologies.
To make sure we're thinking about the whole picture.
Exactly. Like, what's the environmental impact from the very beginning of the process all the way to the end use? You gotta look at the whole thing.
Right, zoom all the way out. And speaking of the big picture, it seems like every country wants to be the next hydrogen superpower.
It's a big race, that's for sure.
So is anyone pulling ahead in that race? Are there any front runners we should be paying attention to?
This report actually highlights Latin America and the Caribbean as having huge potential.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, they've got a ton of renewable energy resources, which is perfect for making green hydrogen.
That's a good point. And that's something they haven't always had, right? I mean, they've often had to rely on fossil fuel imports.
Exactly. So this is a big opportunity for them to become more energy independent.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what could that look like? What kind of changes could we see in those regions?
Well, imagine this. They could start replacing those fossil fuel-based fertilizer imports with green ammonia that's made locally.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be huge.
So it's sort of for agriculture.
Right. And, I've been reading a lot about sustainable agriculture lately. And
Right.
that would be a big deal.
Yeah, it would be a game changer for sure.
Okay, so Latin America and the Caribbean, big potential there.
Yeah.
Anywhere else we should be keeping an eye on?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Europe is investing a ton of money in hydrogen infrastructure, and they're really pushing for domestic manufacturing.
So they want to build it all themselves.
Yeah, they want to be self-sufficient. And of course, we can't forget about China.
Right. They're always a big player in these new technologies. What are they up to?
They're ramping up electrolyzer production like crazy, and they've got these really ambitious plans for fuel cell vehicles.
They're moving fast.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we've got this new market emerging, tons of potential, but still early stages. We've got the technology developing, but those costs are still high. And we have this debate about how green hydrogen really is. It's a lot.
It is. It's complex and there's a lot going on, but that's why I think this report is so interesting. It's really pushing for more transparency and some kind of standardized way to measure the real climate impact of hydrogen.
To make sure we're all on the same page.
Exactly. Like, if we're aiming for net zero emissions, we really need to make sure that green hydrogen is actually green.
Right, because otherwise we're just kind of shifting the problem around instead of actually fixing it.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about calling something green, it's about understanding the whole process and making sure it lines up with our goals. So how do we do that? What are some of the things we should be looking at to really assess the environmental impact?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Well, first off, where's the energy coming from to make that hydrogen? If it's from renewables like solar or wind power, that's a good sign.
Makes sense.
But if it's still relying on fossil fuels, even with carbon capture, there are still emissions involved.
Right. It's not just about the hydrogen itself. It's about the whole energy system.
Exactly.
You got it.
Okay, so what else should we be thinking about?
Water usage. That's another big one, especially in places where water is already scarce.
Because they need a lot of water for those electrolyzers, right? Exactly. So we got to make sure that that water is being sourced sustainably and that we're not using this technology in a way that makes water shortages even worse.
So it's about looking at the whole picture, the bigger context. What are the potential consequences? What are the trade-offs?
Exactly. And that's why I think this report is so valuable. It's pushing us to look beyond the hype, to really dig into the details and understand the complexities of this whole hydrogen thing.
To make sure we're making smart decisions.
Exactly. Like, there's a ton of potential here,
Right.
but we have to be realistic about the challenges and make sure we're investing in solutions that are actually sustainable for the long haul.
It is kind of like you were saying before, we need to make sure we're not just creating new problems while trying to solve old ones.
Right, exactly.
But even with all that, you can't deny there's a lot of excitement about the potential of hydrogen.
Yeah, it's definitely got people's attention.
So how do we get there? How do we turn this potential into, an actual reality?
Well, the report is pretty clear on that. It says we need stronger policies that encourage people to actually use green hydrogen.
To make it more appealing.
Exactly. Like, we could have things like carbon pricing or regulations that encourage industries to switch to cleaner options.
So basically give them a little push.
Yeah, sometimes a little nudge in the right direction is all it takes.
Right. What else can we do besides policy stuff?
Research and development, that's always key.
Of course, we need to make it cheaper and more efficient.
Exactly. Bring those costs down, make the technology even better. That's how we really make progress.
It feels like we need everyone working together on this.
Yeah.
Governments, industry, researchers, everyone.
You got it. It's a team effort for sure. And, like with any big challenge, it's going to take some trial and error. We got to be willing to experiment a bit.
And learn from our mistakes.
Absolutely.
So where do you see the biggest opportunities for, I don't know, breakthroughs, big leaps forward?
Well, one area that's really exciting to me is materials science.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
So if we can develop new materials for fuel cells and electrolyzers, I think we could see some really big improvements in how efficient and durable and affordable those technologies are.
So it's about making them better from the ground up, like at the smallest level.
Yeah, kind of like building a better engine, you
Right.
know? If you can improve the core components, the whole system works better.
That makes sense. What about those more out there ideas? Like using natural hydrogen sources or even like, I don't know, microbes to make hydrogen. That stuff still kind of feels like science fiction to me.
I know, right? But that's what I love about this field. There's so much potential for innovation. We might have completely different ways of making hydrogen in the future.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what else is out there that we haven't even thought of yet. But okay, if you had to distill all of this down, what would you say is the most important thing for people to remember about hydrogen?
I'd say hydrogen has the potential to completely transform the way we power our world. It could be huge, but, and this is important, it's not a quick fix.
It's not just going to happen overnight.
Exactly. This is a long game, and it's going to take a lot of work from a lot of people to get there. But I'm optimistic. I think if we make smart choices and we really commit to figuring this out, hydrogen could be a huge part of building a cleaner, more sustainable future for everyone.
It sounds like we have a lot to look forward to then.
I think so. It's a really exciting time to be working in this field, that's for sure.
Well, I'm glad we got to dive into this together. This was a really fascinating conversation.
Me too. It's always fun to talk about the future of energy.